If you're dating an avoidant, you're going to want to hear this, because the truth is that your avoidant partner has a very high chance of ghosting you in some way. This is a common pattern for avoidance, and it's something that's very painful and very difficult to cope with. In fact, I'm sure that some people watching this video have already had it happen to them once or even multiple times. But the truth is that there are things you can do to change this dynamic, to prevent being ghosted, or even repair the relationship if it's already happened. Of course, I'm Brad Browning, and I've been a relationship and breakup coach here on YouTube for almost 15 years now. And along the way, I've heard thousands and thousands of stories. And of course, I've started to notice patterns in the way that people treat each other in relationships. And one of these patterns is that avoidance, that is, people with an avoidant attachment style, will almost always ghost their partners at some point in one way or another. So first off, what exactly are avoidants anyways? I'm sure you already have some idea, but let's quickly drill down on the definition because I know some people see this differently. Avoidant is just a shorthand term for what we're really talking about here, and that is people with an avoidant attachment style. Now, I've already made whole videos explaining this, which I'll link to in the description below if you want more info, but to keep it simple, everyone has their own attachment style, and this is the way that they form attachments with other people. So typically, we're talking about romantic relationships here. And people with the avoidant attachment style, avoidance, really struggle to create deep connections with other people because they avoid intimacy. Now, they crave closeness like everyone else, but the difference is when they get too close, they start to feel overwhelmed, like they're losing their sense of self. And so they tend to reject this intimacy by pulling away, going silent, and ghosting. Now, I'm going to get more granular with this and talk about the two different types of avoidance later on in the video, but that's all you really need to know from here. Avoidants cope with relationship problems by avoiding them. Now let's talk about how avoidants are prone to pull away from romantic relationships without warning, and how often they do this when it feels like things are actually going really well. Now, this might not be as dramatic as disappearing completely and never responding to any of your messages, although it certainly can be, but I'm also talking about how they'll just go cold, become distant, and otherwise just push you away. So they might freeze you out with the silent treatment. They might give you one-word answers or just generally go out of their way to show you that you're not a priority. Now, most often this kind of issue will crop up when things start to progress in the relationship, but there's certainly no time limit on this. Obviously big milestones like sleeping together for the first time, going on a trip together, moving in, getting married, those are all things that are going to trigger your partner's avoidance. Or it can coincide with peaceful times in the relationship when, your partner has a lot of time to just sort of stew with their thoughts. Now, this may feel difficult because I'm basically saying that it can happen anytime without warning. And that is, unfortunately, the truth. But what this means is that you shouldn't try to avoid these moments of connection for fear of scaring your partner off. Obviously, if you avoid telling your partner that you love them or progressing your relationship, this just isn't worth the trade-off. And like I said, it can't actually prevent your partner from leaving, because it can also happen when things seem totally normal. But that doesn't mean that you have to resign yourself to the idea that a relationship with an avoidant is doomed. As I said, ghosting might come in the form of something smaller, like them putting distance between the two of you and going cold. And even that can be avoided if you're able to understand how your partner works and how to treat them. Some people say that it's unfair to put all the onus on you to figure out how to act rather than on them to stop pulling away. And really, I'd agree. Ideally, they'd be the one facing their own issues and coming to terms with their attachment style. But unfortunately, you only really have control over your own actions here, so I can only tell you what you can do in this situation. Now, I'm actually working on a video for the avoidants out there, so stay tuned for that in the future. But for now, the question becomes, why do avoidants do this? Why do they consistently ghost their romantic partners? Well, the bottom line is that they do this because intimacy feels very threatening to them. They want it, but it also scares them. And regardless of you or your partner's goals, intimacy will naturally build up the longer you two spend together. And when intimacy reaches a level that makes them uncomfortable, their default is to take space rather than talk about it. Now, they probably know that they should talk to you, but they feel that they can't for a few reasons. First off, regardless of who you are, this is a tough thing to broach with a significant other. Feelings of being smothered, being trapped, being overwhelmed are obviously really hard to discuss because it feels like, rejecting your partner if you say, hey, I need some space. And if they've already been the one holding things back and keeping you at arm's length, which is very likely if they are an avoidant, then they know that asking for more space is going to hurt your feelings and lead to the kind of confrontation that they're hoping to avoid. And on top of that, it's even more difficult if you have an anxious attachment style. And since anxious and avoidant relationships are very common, this is honestly quite likely. So your partner may not know the terminology here, but either way, they're going to know how you treat them, what triggers you, and what you do when you feel there are issues in the relationship. Basically, if they pull away, they know that you're going to get upset and cling on tighter, which is exactly what they don't want. So they'll hold out for as long as they can. They'll let the tension build, and eventually this problem is going to come to dominate the relationship for them. And now they're really struggling with what to do, and they feel like there's no way out. And meanwhile, as far as you're concerned, things are totally fine. They're hiding these feelings from you as part of their ineffective strategy of coping, whether they realize it or not. And some avoidants will actually start to resent you at this point. They'll think, can't they see that I'm at my limit here? I can't spend any more time with them right now. Or, we just spent all day together yesterday and now they want more. Now, of course, this is pretty ridiculous since they've given you no indication that they're even having these feelings. But this is just an example of how powerful these mental formations can become. But back to the topic, when the intimacy becomes too much, your avoidant partner is going to take space from you suddenly and intensely, often without any warning. So worst case scenario, you just stop hearing from them entirely, and when you reach out, you get nothing back. I've even had clients who returned home to find that their partner had moved out without warning and they never saw them again. Obviously, that's incredibly extreme, but occasionally it does happen. And then, there are the less intense forms that this will take, like your partner going cold. Maybe they respond with one-word answers. Maybe they seem incredibly distracted and then get upset when you call them out on it. They may make excuses, but you both know that something has changed, even if they refuse to acknowledge it. And this is what makes this all so hard. If your relationship takes a hit, that's one thing, but if you can never discuss it with your partner because they refuse to admit that it's happening, then you're really never going to get anywhere. So you probably feel pretty stuck and pretty alone right now. It's a tough battle you're fighting, and it can feel like your partner doesn't care about you. Like they can just shut off their feelings for you because they were never that strong in the first place. It's like they don't actually respect you or need you. And really, that's actually quite far from the truth. Because when an avoidant does this, they're actually feeling a lot of very powerful emotions. That's actually why they pull away in the first place. They're overwhelmed by their feelings of love for you. They're scared of the future, of it not working out. They're scared to connect more deeply with you and discuss their feelings and actually create intimacy. And they're also full of guilt and shame for the way that they're treating you. Because they know that this isn't fair to you, but they feel like they're compelled to act this way. They wish they could just, embrace you and tell you how they feel, but that feels even scarier than pulling away from you. Now, avoidants have gotten very good at hiding these feelings as a strategy to avoid dealing with them and putting their hearts at risk. So just, don't think that your avoidant partner is like a robot or that they don't care. The issue is that they do care, and that's what's causing them to pull away. Now, to understand this, we're going to have to get a little bit more specific here and talk about the two different types of avoidance: the fearful avoidant and the dismissive avoidant. Now, this is, I realize, a little technical, but I think it helps to know where this behavior is coming from if you want to really understand this person. So the dismissive avoidant is the classic avoidant and the more common one. Now, people become dismissive avoidants in childhood when they're taught that emotions are, unimportant or even negative. So maybe they'd get too excited about something and their parents would make them feel stupid for expressing their joy. Or maybe they'd cry too much and their parents would yell at them or shun them when they wanted comfort. And another source for dismissive avoidance is highly enforced independence. So latchkey kids may form this attachment style because they felt like they had to do everything on their own to get by, including managing their own emotions. They learn that they can survive and meet their own emotional needs for the most part. So now when they see people seek emotional validation, it seems like weakness, and so they dismiss it. So how does this manifest? Well, the dismissive avoidant is going to downplay emotions, both their own and those of other people. And it may seem like it's because they just don't care or they can't empathize with you, but it's more about their own discomfort with these feelings. And this coping strategy of dismissing your emotions will come in handy big time when you bring up the issue of them pulling away. They'll essentially try to gaslight you into thinking that you're making an issue out of nothing. It's like, you're the bad guy for suggesting they even have emotions in the first place. As far as they're concerned, if anything has changed, it's you, because you're suddenly making emotional demands on them, even though, in their mind, they've done nothing to deserve it. Now, on the other hand, fearful avoidant partners are a little bit different. Now, they have a deep fear of abandonment, but they also struggle with feeling overwhelmed by closeness. So they crave connection, but they also fear it. And this creates a sort of push-pull dynamic where they might come on strong and then withdraw when things get too real. They're typically very emotionally conflicted about relationships. So one moment they seem to want you, and the next they pull away. They'll be friendly, loving, caring, and then totally distant out of nowhere. And they'll send mixed signals like this because they want that closeness, but when they get it, it scares them, and so they pull away. And these are the partners that are likely to ghost you out of nowhere because they get so overwhelmed by their own emotions that they feel like there's no other option. Now, the difference between these two groups can be subtle, but it is going to be important to understand as we talk about how to actually handle them. So if you haven't yet been ghosted by your avoidant partner, then what can you do to actually help the situation? Well, like I said earlier, you can only control your own actions here. So there's no guarantee that you can totally stop this from happening. But if you do follow my advice, you're going to set yourself up for the best chance of preventing this. It's going to help you manage the intimacy in your relationship in a way that's hopefully going to break this cycle. Now, of course, your partner is going to have to be willing to treat you right, but you need to do your best to meet them halfway. And that starts with number one, which is manage your own anxiety. Now, as I've said, many of the issues surrounding avoidance are made worse by their anxious partners. It's a negative cycle. So your partner pulls away in a minor way, like maybe they cancel some plans, and instead of taking them at their word, that something came up last minute and they're not going to be able to make it, you immediately go into detective mode. You wonder what's really going on. Did they suddenly lose interest? Do they hate you? Are they going to break up with you? And now, this minor issue becomes a massive one. And that's really the thing with avoidance. You don't know whether your partner was bailing due to a legitimate conflict or because they were just pulling away. And because they avoid intimacy, chances are they didn't do a lot to make you feel better about it. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter because avoidants go through this pattern almost constantly. They feel like they're getting too close, so they pull away a little. And after getting a little space, they start to miss you, and so they come right back and they hold you in their arms. And I totally get how this is frustrating, but you really have two options here. Either you don't see your partner for a couple of days every so often, you have to deal with some feelings of rejection, and then you reconnect and things are totally fine. Or you can make it into a big issue, you can demand answers, demand apologies, and demand more closeness. And really, you may even get these things, but ultimately, you are going to drive your avoidant partner away because they'll begin to feel like they can't have any space from you without it becoming a huge issue. So they may pull away less in the short term, but they'll start building serious emotional walls to keep you out because they no longer feel like they have any other option. Now, I know that this is a really hard one to face for many people because it's really not fair. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You just need to ask yourself, what outcome you'd prefer here. So then the question becomes, what can you do here besides just reaching out to your partner? And the answer is that you need to find ways to manage your own feelings without your partner's input. Now, it can be really easy to neglect this. Life can be really difficult and lonely sometimes. And so when we get into a romantic relationship, we can let it be our only source of emotional regulation. You feel stressed at work, spend time with your partner. Break your sunglasses, complain to your boyfriend about it. Get in a fight with your friend, plan a weekend trip away with your girlfriend. And these are fine strategies in a limited way, but when you overuse them, they put a lot of pressure on your partner and on the relationship to fulfill your emotional needs in ways that aren't always sustainable. And really, you end up relying on your partner rather than yourself because it's just easier. So ultimately, you're weakening yourself in the process. So really, what you need to do is find ways to manage these feelings without turning to your partner all the time. So, hobbies are a great stress reliever, physical exercise, meditation, your relationship with friends and families, talk therapy, reading, really whatever you can do to actually spread your emotional needs around. It's going to take a lot of pressure off the relationship and allow the two of you to connect more fully. You need to find validation outside the relationship. And that definitely doesn't mean that your partner is totally off the hook, but just that you'll have more resources to deal with these feelings when they crop up, whether they're due to your partner's actions or due to external factors. And then there's number 2, which is to let them set the pace. So one of the main reasons that avoidants ghost, especially early on, is because they feel pressured by their partner to move at a pace that they're not comfortable with. Now, it would be great if you could, if your avoidant partner could just talk about this with you, but as I said, that's not very likely because of their hangups. So instead, they play along until they feel like they can't take it anymore, and then they ghost. And there's a pretty simple fix here. If you start to feel your partner resisting, pulling away, or otherwise trying to slow things down, then change course. Trust your instinct that they're getting a little bit distant, and instead of trying to lock them down, let them take the reins for a while. And this might mean pulling away a little yourself and waiting for them to reach out and to make plans. And it may be totally against your instincts, but I think you'll find that a little restraint on your part will draw them towards you more than ever. And this is especially true for fearful avoidant partners. They think that they want space, but their fear of rejection will have them coming running back as soon as they notice you pulling away. But with all that said, I do want to warn you, don't overdo this one. Because if they think that you're truly done with them, then they may just respect your wishes and actually maintain the radio silence. So there is a bit of a fine line to walk here. And that brings us to number 3, which is to reframe what their behavior means. Now, it's upsetting to feel rejected by your romantic partner, point blank. But I think that a lot of the bad feelings here are actually self-inflicted. You feel that your partner is rejecting you because you're unlovable, that you did something wrong or you pushed them away. But you need to understand that it's way more about them than it is about you. They don't suddenly hate you despite how it may seem. Chances are they don't even really want to be away from you. They just want to avoid the feeling that's causing them distress. And that's it. Now, this is a simple shift, but if you can truly accept this, then you're not going to have to deal with a bunch of guilt and shame on top of the negative feelings that are associated with their behavior. Really, it's just a symptom of their own issues rather than anything personal. And number 4 is to actually accept their avoidance. I think that the biggest issue that people face with an avoidant partner is their desire to change the other person. It's like, things would be perfect if they would just treat me a little differently. And if I explain that, it's going to make them see what they're doing wrong and change for me. But unfortunately, that's not how things work when it comes to dealing with avoidance. Really, you can't control how other people are going to act. You can't live in a what-if reality. You have to accept that this is how they are. Now, they will improve a little over time, but ultimately, these are their coping strategies that they've been honing since they were infants. All the well-intentioned conversations in the world are not going to change that. So really, you need to decide if you can accept them as they are. Can you still love them, knowing that they may pull away at times and leave you feeling sad and alone? Will you be able to roll with the punches and reconnect when they come back around? And if not, then really you may have to just move on and find somebody who can love you more consistently. But if you are able to accept them as they are, I think you will find that most avoidants can make good partners despite the occasional moments of disconnection. All right, let's talk about what to do if you're watching this video because you have already been ghosted by an avoidant. Well, if you have made it this far, then I'm sure I don't have to tell you that calling them, texting them, or showing up at their house, those things are not the answer. The more you cling to them, the more they're going to pull away. So what can you do? Well, first, you need to decide if you actually want to reconnect or if you just want to move on. As I said, there are a lot of gray areas here. If you dated them for a year, you lived together and then came home to an empty house one day, then honestly, I don't know if there's a huge chance that you'll ever be able to trust them again, even if they did come crawling back to you begging for forgiveness. In that kind of situation, you're probably just going to want to move on. But, if things weren't all that serious or the two of you just lost touch in a more subtle way, then maybe it is worth salvaging. But the good news is that either way, my advice for the first 30 days or so is actually going to be the same. And that is just don't contact them. Don't pine for them. Just act as if it's over and begin the process of moving on. Get your own life back on track. Focus on your work, your hobbies, your friendships. Distract yourself. And then begin to work towards your goals. But if they reach out to you, then you have a choice to make. If you don't want them back, then I recommend you simply don't answer. Honestly, I don't think you're going to get a lot of closure here. Unless they, got lost in the wilderness for the last month, there's really no excuse for them to ghost you like this. But if you do want them back, then in most cases you should respond. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that this is sort of different advice than I'd normally give. Normally I'd say, don't respond, stay silent. But with a ghoster, they need to at least know that you'd still be open to reconnecting. Because they know that they messed up and that you're probably pissed, so they'll take silence as a sign to leave you alone for good. So really, what you ideally want to do is respond a little. Don't give them the sense that you missed them, that what they did was okay in any way, or even that you're open to getting back together. Just give them the bare minimum and then let them work for it. This is when your avoidant ex is going to have to really fight for another chance with you. So let them do all the work here, at least at first. And then from there, start to reconnect slowly over text and then maybe move into some in-person meetings. At some point, they're going to have to explain themselves and apologize, but don't press them on it, Remember, they're likely to run away if they get spooked again. Now, if we want to talk about how to respond to moments of disconnection that don't reach the level of ghosting, the pulling away, the hot and cold behavior, that's a tougher conversation. Hopefully, I've given you some perspective on this, but as far as actual tactics, that's going to be a longer video. And if that's something you feel like you could use, please leave a comment below and I'll make a video on that topic as well. For now, thanks for watching. I'm Brad Browning and I will see you in the next video.